Welcome, friends and adventurers, to Traps Cool and Unusual, where in every episode I give you 5 new and interesting traps to put in front of your players at your tabletop role-playing campaign. However, before we begin with our 5 traps for today's episode, let me just remind you that traps are not just supposed to be a save or suck, save or die, or resource attrition. Whilst they are good when they're tactical resource attrition to spice up the dungeon proceedings, shall we say, they are even better when used as a set piece that tells us about the lore, that sets the scene, that tells us about the purpose of the dungeon and the plans of its rulers, and then we have, most importantly, the opportunity to give our adventurers something that they can look at and be outright flabbergasted by how dreadful and dangerous it looks. Yet we have planned the trap to be open to interpretation about how to interactively interact with it and dismantle it in many of myriads of possible ways. You don't have to plan this ahead of time to how to disarm the trap. It's just as long as you keep it regular enough, open enough, that it can be approached with many different angles of tactics of just breaking it, circumventing it, and so on, so as to not have any need to be blocked off by it if at first a solution doesn't succeed or players fall into it. As long as the adventurers have the opportunity to further interact with the trap and get away from it, then they'll feel very great when they look behind and think how supposedly lucky they were and how great adventurers they were to have disarmed such a monstrosity. So that's why these traps will sound so gruesome, yet they are designed to have such open environment for solving. And if you have such well-designed traps to let players loose through the dungeon and not need to have them fall into them frequently, then sometimes when they fall in and suffer some resource attrition, they will think to themselves, well, fair. We have avoided so many horrible traps thus far that we're glad that we're just getting into this one and getting out of it. So this is how you use traps and how to have them fun. Mind you, I have a whole episode on how to use traps, but I just wanted to say this so that you know why these traps are gonna sound so gruesome and horrid towards the players. It's only supposed to look that way, and we are actually planning to have them get out of them on their own ideas and devices and possibilities and plans. So without further ado, let's start with number 1. Powered hole. Now, I wanted to give you something that's a classic yet freshen it up a bit, because we want to have dungeon feel frequently very traditional and recognizable. Yet we want the traps to be interesting. So this will be like a spike pit, but instead of spikes that, they deal damage once. They might even cause some specific injuries, but even if they have poison such, there are lots of ways to innovate a spike pit, but we want to get away this time from it being one and done type of deal. Instead of spikes, we have saws that are powered, say, by running water that is running groundwater within the dungeon. That's a cheap power source, for example, that's not detectable easily as, say, magical or something like that. And then we have, indeed, something akin to chainsaws at the bottom of the pit, constantly running, constantly dealing damage, and the more the party takes to pull that person that fell in out of the pit, the more those saws grind and cut into the HP of the person, and with the gruesome sounds and the crumpling and maybe even damaging their armor or something like that, cutting into the flesh and maybe even bone. as much of the time is inefficiently wasted, and on the other hand, the better and quicker the rescue is, the less the damage is, and the more a feeling of being free from the trap will be had by everyone. So that's our number 1, powered hole. But however gruesome that one was, can you imagine how gruesome the second one can be? Just drapes. At number 2, we have drapes. Now, how are common drapes one of the most horrid traps that you can have? Well, you see, if you have a large room with a tall ceiling and you have drapes that are not see-through, they are thick cloth drapes that fall from the ceiling, and they fall in both up and downward direction across and left to right. And they are cut every, say, meter, so that passing through them, running through them is as easy as normal, but visibility is 0 around the person. The person would need to stand very tightly and closely with another person to just even see them in this situation, because all around them is a square of draping, anywhere where they stand. And since the ceiling is tall and the drapes are hanging from the ceiling, even if you pull each one of them, each segment, then that segment just falls and you now need to sort of avoid it and get rid of it, and you have just got rid of one of the 4 walls of one of the meters squared in the whole huge room. So it's impractical. And now the party is in such a room with such draping, well, somebody or something, multiples of them really, that are good at sneaking in combat and backstabbing will fight them and try to constantly backstab them and do such tricky, roguish things. And now party is not acting just as blind, but also if they swing it first bulge behind the drape they see, they might just hit a party member much more easier as opposed to if they were just blinded. So this is quite a unique challenge that I'm sure none of your parties have ran into yet, and the solution is open-ended. Now everybody can think further how to achieve some sort of victory over the circumstances in this room on their own and use their abilities from their arsenal. Now at number 3, we have Prisoner's Gift. Sometimes your party is being a bit too ruthless, for example, and killing all the prisoners that they capture from whatever humanoids or whatever they encounter that's intelligent and can recognize this and can see the brutality for what it is. So at this point, you may have occasional individual that gets captured by the party who has witnessed this to try to offer them Prisoner's Gift, which is essentially one of those I'll take them with me, or I'll distract them as much as I can and I'll try to run away, or at least they won't get me alive type of thing. That's what the prisoner is thinking. And mind you, this is better done with, say, a cursed weapon that's not immediately easy to recognize. If the prisoner gifts them, say, cursed dagger of berserking or something like that, then that can create quite an interesting situation. So whatever it is, whatever it may be, the prisoner will try to act as if they're giving something in return for sparing them. But what they are doing instead is trying to give something that will end the fight in a, less horrible way for the prisoner, even if the fight still ends in their death. And something that will try to return the favor to the party. And once the party hears of these motivations throughout some last scream, or seeing what they are saying when they're running away, or when the party activates the gift, then they'll understand why their brutality has led them to this situation. And they may rethink. Mind you, this isn't a way to be passive-aggressive with your party. It's just supposed to be when you still have a reasonable enough party, but that is acting towards it a bit, this is one of those normal things that you want, and that is World to react. You are, as a DM, in charge of having World react and recognize actions of your party. So, as the world recognizes actions, it reacts in turn. So, at number 4, we have a possibly even more devious conundrum of a trap than even all the previous ones. And that is magnetic floor. Yes, it's very simple, but think what happens when the party finds themselves in a boss room that has a magnet floor that can be turned on with a switch, like an electromagnet or something like that. And then the equipment that could be attracted by a magnet will stick to the floor. This will inconvenience some people, whilst it will topple completely to the floor and stick to it some other people. Now, this gives the opportunity to have equipment have a bit different meaning in a certain fight. People who are in certain types of armor, they may need to unbuckle and unclasp their guards and get out of it. Certain weapons won't be usable, but people in light armor with mostly wooden weapons and such will have great opportunity to shine and hold the fort, per se, until everybody else gets on their feet. But, to be even more insidious, do go into detail. If there are flasks of potions that could get damaged or broken because they have some sort of metallic caps or reinforcements or whatever is metal goes to the floor and quite at a speed, and if something of that is breakable enough, well, let's see what happens when it breaks. Maybe it will just break and leak, but maybe it will also explode. It depends on what the thing in question is. So, as I said, go into detail, check everything, see what's fun to interact with, and see how the original boss fight strikes them. Because, lots of parties, in my experience, want to experience challenging boss fights that are interesting and unique, so that they have what to reminisce about, that they've defeated, that was out of this world. So, do give it a try. And finally, for indeed just such an occasion, we have a manually operated dungeon. Think of it as a dungeon that has lots of traps that are being able to be deployed and manipulated by a person running the dungeon from a control room. And the person would see how the party acts and reacts to all these things through, say, a levitating crystal ball that is properly enchanted to be able to give vision and sound to the other end, and unbeknownst to party, even to cast spells through, so that whilst the party is not bothering with the tauntingly close camera that is following them everywhere, as soon as they do attack it, then the owner would like to try to defend it, have it escape, and cast spells through it to facilitate better defense of the one important bit for this whole situation. So that's how this version of manually operated dungeon would work. It's a sort of easier version because you could technically have at higher levels some higher spells to replace this completely and have much more difficulter time removing the vision from the enemy towards the party, but this one is easier for more first-time attempts at such things. And then when the party finally succeeds in defeating all the enemies and ambushes, succeeds to survive all the traps sprung at them and beat them down, and then they break into the control room, they have quite a classical scene from Wizard of Oz where they have helpless dungeon master at their mercy from behind the curtain of the controls to drag out and punish as they will for what he or she has done to them thus far. So, adventurer, if you thought this was unique, maybe you can spare me a click and I could see you here next or even perhaps every week. Also, I would love to hear any thing you might want to add or opinion you may have in the comments. Because I love to just talk to everybody and answer everything. Anyways, until next time, I wish you luck on your adventures and to see you again soon.